Hey, Lord of the Rings strategy battle game fans, finally back with another video doing part 2 or the second battle of the Fords of Isen. And right now we're looking, so this happened just after the death of Theodred, Prince Theodred, King Theoden's son. The forces of Rohan were in a little bit of disarray, but quickly pulled themselves together. Erkenbrand, who became the de facto leader of the Westfold now with Theodred's death, he was at Helm's Deep organizing the defenses and could not yet come to the fords. So command evolved around Grimbold and Elfhelm. Grimbold was from the West March while Elfhelm was from Edoras. The two were friends, but they had different philosophies. Grimbold wanted to defend the fords despite the fact that Saruman could send troops down either side, and so they would be trapped. But Grimbold decided to defend them anyway. Elfhelm went a few hundred yards away on the east bank to watch the northern approach to the forts. So Grimbold, what he did was he put his foot soldiers in these two earthen forts. I don't have two earthen forts. I just have these one wooden palisade, which I've divided into to simulate the earthen forts. Now each little figure represents 50 men, so I have 800 men in each fort. So I have a force of 1,600 roughly, Rohirrim, holding the west bank, and on the east bank, just over there, now on the east bank, I've got Grimbold as a royal guardsman with another force of 400 extra infantry and 120 cavalry. So each little man represents 50 guys and the horse represents 60, a squadron of 60. So he's got just over 500 guys on that bank. Now the Ayat, which I used as a piece of styrofoam, in the middle of the stream, the fords, he left bare, and Prince Theodred is buried up there. So in the end, Grimbold's defense was a failure. Not entirely, but it was too much. Saruman's strength was too great. So Saruman began his attack by day, and before noon on March 2nd, a strong force of his best fighters coming down by the road from Isengard attacked the forts on the west of the fords. This force was in fact only a small part of those he had in hand, and no more than he deemed sufficient to dispose of the weakened defense. So for this I used orcs and Uruk-Hai, or half orcs, half men. So I've got 3 companies of 400 attacking each fort. So that's 1,200 orcs and Uruk-Hai attacking each fort. I have a reserve force of 400 heavy Uruks, or Uruk-Hai, and another 800 bowmen. So in total, 3,600 troops of Saruman's troops fighting against 1,600 Rohirrim. So they're outnumbered 2 to 1. Now I didn't bring any scaling ladders with that because these are earthen forts. Earthen forts would have a ditch with some stakes supporting it. And they wouldn't need ladders to overcome these obstacles. They just have to force their way through. Okay, so they heavily engaged the forts, but the garrison of the forts, though greatly outnumbered, resisted stubbornly. At length, when both the forts were heavily engaged, a troop of Uruks forced the passage between them and began to cross the forts. So I've got my troop of heavy Uruks down there. They forced their way between the two sides because all the men in the forts are now heavily engaged, and they have drawn off massive amounts of troops to defend the walls elsewhere. So most of their strength is away from the actual passage. So now the orcs start crossing to force their way over, and they would be in disarray by this time, had taken some losses. Now Grimbold, trusting in Elfhelm to hold off attack on the east side, came across all the men he had left and flung them back for a while. So Grimbold's company is going to charge through the ford. So Grimbold's going to meet the enemy in the middle of the ford, and he's going to fling them back. He forces them back, makes them run away. Run away, run away! So Grimbold held the forts for a minute, but then the commander throws in another battalion. So I got another 400 heavy orcs, and they're gonna break through one of the earthen forts. They're gonna break through one of these forts, and it's gonna force Grimbold to retreat across to the eastern bank. And it was by then near sunset. So he had suffered much loss, but inflicted far heavier losses on the enemy, mostly orcs. So he probably lost about 50% of his men. You know, you could play the scenario and see how many men you lose. It'd probably have, with the numbers involved in the archers, Saruman's forces lost mostly orcs. So most of the half-men survive. So the orcs are the fodder, and probably 2/3 of the orcs are dead, and maybe 20% of the Uruks are dead, are killed in this exchange. So Grimbold is forced to retreat across the fords. So this is how it would have looked at sunset after Grimbold retreated across the fords. Like I said, I took his losses at just over 800. He lost roughly 900 men total. And the orcs lost about 2,000. But there's still a substantial force on the other bank. But then, just before midnight, points of red light were seen coming from the north and already drawing near the west of the river. It was the vanguard of the whole remaining forces of Saruman that he was now committed to battle for the conquest of Westfold. So they're going to come on at great speed, and suddenly all the host burst into flame, as it seemed. Hundreds of torches were kindled from those borne by the leaders of the troops. Gathered into their stream of forces already manning the west bank, they swept over the fords like a river. You can see I got Grimbold's remaining forces holding the east bank. All of a sudden, around midnight, you see torches. So I'm using my berserkers with torches here. I don't have enough of them to emulate that. And you see the vanguard of Saruman's army crossing. And I even have my Dunlanders now making an appearance at the far end there. I got Thride and Wolfsbane and the his guardsmen, and some wild men of Dunland. I need to get the wild Dunland army, because most Dunlanders didn't have very good armor. They weren't well armed, despite Saruman's best attempts to arm them. They still didn't have a lot of good weaponry compared to the Rohan. Now Grimbold didn't have enough archers. I only got 200 archers in this little thing, and he didn't have enough of them to stop that horde from crossing at night. Enemy archers would have been skipping arrows across trying to shoot from the other bank or on the islet to hit his own army. So there's no way in hell he was going to stop this horde, and he was just going to get swamped. So he started to withdraw, forming a great shield wall about his camp. So he is going to withdraw from the fords, so the fords are now lost, and now Grimbold has got to make his escape. So Grimbold he retreats from the east bank of the Fords of Isen because he knows he can't hold it back, and he makes a shield wall around his camp. So he retreats to his main camp and retreats and makes a shield wall. So I've taken basically every archer I have and given them a shield and a sword and a spear, because it's now nighttime, it's after dark, and there's no way archers are going to be able. He doesn't have enough archers to hold back anything. So I've got this scenario set up where I've got some, say, 1,200 Rohirrim in a circle. 120 of them are on horseback, and the rest are in their shield wall. They're surrounded by several thousand, mostly orcs, but with some Dunish troops and some Uruk-Hai, light armored Uruk-Hai. So after he forms a great shield wall around his camp, soon it was surrounded, and the attackers cast torches among them. Some they sent high over the heads of the shield wall, hoping to kindle fires among the stores and terrify such horses as Grimbold still had, but the shield wall still had. So you see I got my berserkers with their torches. They hurl it in, try and scare people, try and burn some supplies, and all that fun stuff. Now, they don't send the orcs in to attack. For some reason, Saruman's forces don't attack all at once. If you play the scenario, I would send everything in at once. I wouldn't hesitate. The problem with fighting at night is you might run into each other and kill your own side. That's the biggest drawback. And orcs, you'd think, would be the best at attacking at night because they can see better. But it says here that orcs were less avail in such fighting because of their stature. Fierce companies of the Dunish hillmen were thrown against it. Throws his Dunish troops into the fray. So I've got basically 2 companies of Danish troops, throwing them in, and I throw them in, hoping to break the shield wall. So basically I'm throwing both my companies of Danish troops against the shield wall, hoping to break it. And that scenario, they probably would break through, or they would, or do some damage. Fierce companies of Danish hillmen were thrown against the wall, the shield wall. But for all their hatred, the Dunlendings were still afraid of the Rohirrim if they met face to face. And they were also less skilled in warfare and less armed. The shield wall held. So the Danish troops would have been repulsed. This is again Lord of the Rings. The Peter Jackson trilogy makes the Rohirrim really strong compared to the Gondorians. But it makes the hillmen, you never really see the hillmen, they just do some damage to the civilian population. They never actually fight in the battle. It's the Uruk-Hai who are doing all the fighting, and it seems like Saruman's army is just full of Uruk-Hai, but really it's not. Saruman has about 10,000 orcs and probably a few thousand Uruk-Hai, as well as about 4,000 Danish troops. I use the Middle-earth role-playing stats for this, and it's about... Saruman's got about 20,000 troops to throw against Rohan, mostly orcs and Danishmen, but the Dunmen are not the same stature. They're smaller, they're less well equipped than the Rohirrim, because Rohan is also supplied by Gondorian armorers who are better at smithcraft than the Rohirrim. So they're repulsed, they move back. They've probably taken some casualties, so you could probably knock a few off. Now if you were to play this like in the roleplay, so the shield wall holds. So Grimbold is looking for help to come from Elfhelm, but none came for different reasons. We'll get to that later. And he at length recognized the wisdom of Elfhelm and understood that though his men might fight on till all were slain, it would, if he ordered it, such a valor would not help Erkenbrand, who has yet to arrive on the field. Erkenbrand's the one guy who never appears until the very end of the Battle of Helm's Deep. He's never on the field when you need him. Now, a wind was moving from the east, a forerunner of the great storm that, when day came, would pass over Rohan and burst over Helm's Deep the next night. So Grimbold was well aware that most of the torches had been extinguished and the fury of the assault had abated. He therefore at once mounted those riders for whom horses were available, not more than half an arad, and placed them under the command of Dunhir. So really he has less than 120 horses. The full arad is 120. So he's got less than that, but probably more than 60. So two companies of horses is fine. So the shield wall was opened on the east side. So he opened it up on the east side, moving guys around, shortening the wall, and his horsemen come bursting out. They come bursting out of the eastern side, driving back their assailants on the side, then dividing and wheeling around, they charged the enemy to the north and south. So they hit the orcs at a weak spot, where I got archers, so let's say. They forced them back, kill this guy off, and then getting behind, on each side, they come back and hit again, causing confusion because it's nighttime. Even though orcs can see pretty well, it was a cloudy night with no moon. So the enemy was confused and dismayed. Many thought at first that a large force of riders had come up from the east. Grimbold himself remained on foot with a rearguard of picked men, already chosen, covered for the moment by these, and the riders under Durham. The remainder retreated at what speed they could. So while they were hitting that, trying to widen the gap, the Rohirrim basically went through it. Grimbold probably kept no more than a couple of hundred men as a rear guard, and the rest got the hell out of Dodge. So that's how Grimbold escapes the trap. So the remainder retreated with what speed they could. So they get out, but Saruman's commander soon perceived that the shield was broken, the defenders in flight. Fortunately, the moon was overtaken by cloud and all was dark again. And the commander was in haste. He did not allow his troops to press the pursuit of the fugitives far into the dark. Now the four were captured, he gathered his force as best he could and made for the road southward. So it was that the greater part of Grimbold's men survived. They were scattered in the night, but as he had ordered, they made their ways away from the road east of the great turn where it bent west towards the Isen. They were relieved but amazed to encounter no enemies, not knowing that a large army had already passed some hours before passed southward, and that Isengard was now guarded but little by its own strength of wall and gate. So that's what happens to Grimbold. His men break out on the eastern side, and then they scatter in probably prearranged scatter plan. Mostly to the east and to the north, away from the Great Road, and each making their way in little groups of men. Then here's cavalry in Grimbold's rearguard protecting, but the commander doesn't press the attack. He sends a few men in to pursue, but nothing else happens, and no great damage. So most of his men survive. He probably lost no more than 100 men in the entire encounter, and probably did more damage to the orcs in the breakout and to the Danish troops who were thrown against him. So losses were light on both sides, but the fact is, Grimbold's men survived to fight another day. So that is Grimbold's journey in the second battle of the Fords of Isen. And we'll meet up with Grimbold again, and we'll get on to Alfhelm next.